After the age of 60, many people begin to notice small changes in their memory. Maybe you walk into a room and forget why you went there. Maybe you misplace your glasses or forget a name during a conversation. Most of the time, these small lapses are completely normal. Our brains change slowly as we age, and occasional forgetfulness is part of life. But here's something important that many people don't realize. Not all memory loss is simply a normal aging. In fact, doctors often say the brain begins sending subtle warning signs long before serious memory problems appear. The challenge is that these early signals are often very easy to overlook. Many people assume they are just tired, or distracted, or simply getting older. But sometimes the brain is quietly telling us that something deeper may be changing. The good news is that recognizing these signals early can make a big difference. Because the earlier people notice unusual memory changes, the easier it can be to understand what's happening and take steps to support brain health. Today we're going to talk about 3 warning signs that memory loss may not be typical aging. These are signals many doctors watch for when evaluating memory concerns. And interestingly, one of these signs often appears during everyday conversations without people realizing it. As we go through them, you may recognize some of these situations from daily life. For example, imagine someone sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, trying to remember something that happened just yesterday, but the memory feels strangely out of reach. Moments like that can feel confusing, but they can also provide clues about how the brain is working. So let's begin with the first warning sign, which often appears in a situation many people experience every day. Warning sign #1, repeating the same question or story. One of the earliest signals that doctors often notice is frequent repetition. Imagine an older adult sitting in the living room talking with family. During the conversation, they tell a story about something that happened last week. A few minutes later, they tell the same story again, almost word for word, without realizing it. Or they might ask a question like, "Did you call the doctor today?" and then ask the exact same question again shortly afterward. Now, occasional repetition happens to everyone. Sometimes we simply forget that we already mentioned something, but when the brain begins having difficulty storing new information, repetition can happen more often. This occurs because the brain may struggle to move information from short-term memory into long-term storage. In simple terms, the brain hears something, but it doesn't fully save it. So the person may not remember that the conversation already happened. Family members often notice this sign before the person does. They might gently say, "You already told me that," or "You asked it a few minutes ago." While this can feel frustrating, it's often one of the earliest clues that the brain is having difficulty processing new memories. Warning sign #2, difficulty following conversations. Another signal that memory changes may not be typical aging appears during normal conversations. 2 friends sitting at a table talking. The conversation moves from one topic to another. One moment they're discussing a grandchild. The next moment they're talking about travel plans. For us people, the brain easily follows these changes. But when memory processing becomes harder, a person may begin losing track of the conversation. They may suddenly pause and ask, "Wait, what were we talking about?" Or they might struggle to remember details that were mentioned just moments earlier. This isn't simply forgetting a word or a name. Instead, it's difficulty keeping track of the flow of information. The brain is working harder to keep. As a result, conversations can start to feel confusing or mentally exhausting. Some people respond by becoming quieter in group discussions, not because they don't want to participate, but because keeping track of multiple ideas becomes more challenging. These first 2 warning signs can appear slowly over time, which is why many people overlook them. But there are also other signals that can reveal even more about how the brain is functioning. One of them often appears during everyday routines that most people perform without thinking. And when this sign begins to appear, it can sometimes be a stronger indication that memory changes deserve closer attention. Warning sign #3. Forgetting familiar routines. The third warning sign often appears during activities that have been part of someone's life for many years. Think about a simple daily routine. For example, making a cup of tea in the morning. Someone might walk into the kitchen, turn on the kettle, and reach for a cup without even thinking about it. These actions become automatic after repeating them for decades. But when certain areas of the brain begin struggling with memory and organization, these familiar routines can suddenly feel confusing. Imagine someone standing in the kitchen holding a spoon, but pausing because they can't remember what they were about to do next. Or perhaps they start preparing breakfast and suddenly forget a step in a process they followed thousands of times before. Another common example might happen while driving. Older adult driving toward a grocery store they've visited for years. Halfway there, they suddenly feel unsure about the route. For a moment, the destination feels unfamiliar. This can feel surprising because long-term habits are usually stored very deeply in the brain. When these routines start becoming difficult to remember or follow, it may signal that the brain is having trouble organizing and retrieving stored information. Sometimes people describe it as their mind briefly going blank in the middle of a task. It may only last a few seconds. But when these moments happen more frequently, they can begin to interfere with daily activities. Another thing many people notice is that these memory lapses often appear during situations that once felt effortless. For example, following a simple recipe, remembering steps while paying bills, completing a familiar household chore, instead of moving smoothly through the task, the person may pause and think, "Wait, what was I doing?" Occasional moments like this can happen to anyone, but when familiar routines repeatedly become confusing, it can sometimes be a signal that the brain's memory systems are under extra strain. Noticing changes in memory can feel unsettling, but it's important to remember something reassuring. Many memory changes after 60 are completely normal, especially when they involve small things like occasionally forgetting a name or misplacing an item. However, the 3 signs we discussed today are different because they involve patterns that repeat more often over time. Let's briefly recap them. First, frequently repeating the same question or story, sometimes without realizing it. Second, having difficulty following conversations, especially when several ideas are being discussed. And third, struggling with familiar routines that once felt automatic. When these changes begin appearing regularly, doctors usually recommend paying closer attention to brain health. This doesn't necessarily mean something serious is happening, but it does mean the brain may need extra support and monitoring. In many cases, small lifestyle habits can help keep the brain active and resilient. For example, research often shows that the brain benefits from simple daily activities like regular walking or gentle physical movement, social interaction with friends or family, learning new skills or hobbies, reading, puzzles, or mentally engaging activities, maintaining good sleep habits. Even small routines like taking a daily walk or having regular conversations with loved ones can stimulate different parts of the brain. You might imagine an older adult walking through a park, greeting neighbors, or chatting with a friend over coffee. Moments like these help keep the brain engaged. Another helpful step is simply paying attention to patterns. If memory changes seem to be happening more frequently, it can be helpful to discuss them with a healthcare professional who understands brain health. Early awareness allows people to better understand what's happening and explore ways to support cognitive function. The most important thing is not ignoring persistent changes. Our brains, just like our muscles, benefit from care, activity, and attention. And often, the earlier we notice small changes, the more options we have to protect and strengthen our cognitive health. So here's a question worth thinking about. In your own daily life, have you noticed any of these memory changes happening more often recently?